Welcome to Building Better Communities with Bob Hart, the podcast that dives into the stories of the leaders in commercial real estate and beyond as they talk about their careers, the market, and what it takes to build better communities. On today's episode, Daryl Carter, founder, chairman, and CEO of Avanath Capital Management, joins Bob on the podcast. Now for your host, Bob Hart.
Well, welcome everybody. Welcome to the Building Better Communities podcast with Bob Hart. That's me, Bob Hart. I'm your host. I've asked my good friend and longtime real estate industry icon, Daryl Carter, to be our guest today, live here at the Beehive at the BizNow Multifamily West Conference. The Beehive is a iconic new state-of-the-art event facility here. It's south of the 10 and east of the 110 here in South Los Angeles. So thrilled to be here. And Daryl, thanks for coming on.
Great. You were supposed to tell me I should have wore a tie, but
I should have called you this morning,
well,
man.
I figured that if someone gets us mixed up, I'll tell people, hey, I'm the guy without the tie.
The last time Daryl had to cover for me was we were both panelists at a NMHC conference, I think in DC, in front of about 2,000 people, and the room was like this, but it was completely dark. And Daryl was sitting where he is, and I was coming up on stage, and I accidentally tripped. Daryl was the only one that saw it, thank God. So you're a good man. One of my more humble moments. So Daryl, let's talk about your personal story a bit and understand your commercial real estate background. You started out in banking. Before that, you were a student at Michigan where you played basketball, and I believe you went to MIT where you got a dual degree in architecture and business. Talk about your early career, because I know the seat of that at Continental Bank and many of the mentors and peers you had there led to where you're at today.
Well, I was very blessed. I've been blessed in many ways. I grew up in Detroit, Michigan. Incredible parents, very, very hardworking, who were really immigrants, moved from Mississippi to Detroit to work in the auto industry. But I was blessed to have the experience of being able to go to college, and then I started my career in the early 80s at Continental Illinois Bank, which is now, I guess, B of A, because all these banks, you have to get back to what they were.
It was about the fourth or fifth largest
bank. It was
the
fifth largest bank. And what was fascinating about that, I had a group of peers we were all in our early 20s, and many of them went on to become CEOs, David Nethercutt at EQR, Mary Ann King, who's the president of Berkadia, Albert Perez, who's the CEO of McKinley. So it was a great group of people and peers, and that's when I got my first taste of the business. And I traveled, I worked in the area that financed home builders, and my client base was Arizona, Florida, and California.
That's where
and I decided after living in Detroit, Boston, and Chicago that I'm going to live in one of those three. And I reached out for jobs, and whichever one was first, that's where I'd be. So it ended up being California in Orange County, and I've been there for 30 plus years.
And I remember hearing your story at Continental, because you had a great mentor there. He was kind of an iconic guy.
Jim Harper. Amazing person, and there were a lot of other folks who kind of were in the process mentored, like Jim Klingbeil. I don't know if you know Jim, he's a developer. And then I had an early customer who I would get calls from security, and that was Sam Zell, and that was during his biking kind of days, and he'd have a bandana and a leather jacket, and I get a call from bank security. There is a Mr. Zell who's attempting to see the chairman of the bank. And I said, yes, he's our largest customer. Please escort him to the chairman's office. But it was a great place to learn the business.
Yeah, and I think that probably had a lot to do with how you shaped your career later. I know you and Quentin Primo grew up in Detroit. You started Capri. Talk a little bit about that and how that informed some of your
Quentin and I met in Quentin Primo, for those he was my partner. We started Capri Capital in 1991. And Quentin and I went to high school together. And then we reconnected in actually Boston. He was at Harvard Business School while I was at MIT. And then we wound up in Chicago. He worked at Citibank and I worked at Continental Bank. And so we were young guys in Chicago closing the bars on Rush Street. working till 9 and 10 o'clock at night.
You were more the pragmatist, and
Yes.
he was more the dreamer.
Yeah, I left earlier.
Yeah. And so you guys sold a portion of that company to Steve Ross, I believe.
Yes, we started Capri in 1991. We built it. We had two parts of the business, an investment management part that had about $2 billion under management, and then we built a lending platform that lent in multifamily for Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, and HUD, and that grew to some size. We had about an $8 billion servicing portfolio, and we ended up selling that business, 100% of that business in 2005 to an affiliate of the related companies, and I went to work for Steve Ross and Jeff Blau for 3 years, which was just an incredible experience. I mean, it was I learned a lot.
Both Michigan guys.
But yeah, all Michigan guys. So it was, but I remember the first meeting I had with Steve when they basically took our company, merged it with another company in the debt business, and I was CEO of that. So I gave Steve my business plan, and he looked at it and he said, and Steve didn't, was not good at flowery explanations. He said, okay. He says, what does it look like if you doubled it? I'm like, well, I don't know. I mean, this is pretty. He said, what if you doubled it or triple it? What resources do we need, and what risks will we be taking? And candidly, I'd never thought of that, but the whole point was about scale, and when many people think, and you've done an amazing job of scaling your business, and one of the things, it's great to have a great business idea, it's great to make it work, but you attract capital when you scale.
You do.
And that was what Steve always drove. Well, how do you scale it?
What was it like working for a few years for Related before you started to That's where you got your taste about affordable.
Yes, and it was amazing. Being around, and I don't know if there's anybody in the audience from Related, but I think it's an incredible company with some of the smartest people, and I've tried to emulate many of the things that they do in our company, and mainly by having the best talent. I mean, this is a talent-driven business, and that's what you succeed with, having great people. And I think that, but also thinking about scale and thinking about how you build things and how do you double it, how do you triple it, and mainly scale creates, growth creates opportunities for people. If you're not growing your business and scaling it, you very often will lose people to companies that are.
And diversification for capital as well.
Yes, absolutely.
So let's fast forward a little bit to right at the time of the GFC, you launched your business.
Yes.
Avanath. That was we probably didn't know how difficult a time that was at the time, but you went ahead and did it. And you raised your first fund.
We raised our first fund, but what many people don't know, and you may have some sense of it, we tried to buy, or we did buy, a 26,000 apartment portfolio, a GP interest, and it was about a $400 million deal. That
was a big deal then.
Yeah, it was May 1st, 2008. I remember when we closed. Horrible time to close. And particularly if you have a $300 million bridge loan that's due in a year.
You were bridging the equity?
Yes, and we put in, my side of the deal put in $60 million of equity. I was half of that.
Wow.
And my good friend, Victor McFarland, Victor was part of this deal.
Who's taller, by the way? You or Victor?
I'm taller.
You sure?
He's richer, I'm taller, I'm better looking, but.
Not to confuse the two.
It had a horrible ending because we ended up, and we ended up not being, we had a deal with a very large pension fund the first week of September that was going to commit $500 million to pay off the bridge loan, get us back half of our equity, and then we go forward in this business plan.
This is pre-Lehman meltdown, but
it was I just remember that day we negotiated a term sheet. It happened to be in New York, very large pension fund, And I remember that day so well because that was like 10 o'clock 11 o'clock our meeting was over, and that was the last weekend at the old Yankee Stadium.
Oh, really?
And I was going to go. I'd never been. That's one of the. I was a huge baseball fan, and I used to travel with my dad to go, and I'd take him to different stadiums. But I had never gone to Yankee Stadium, and so I was excited. I had signed my deal. I had, and then it was great. I went and took a nap. I got up at, the game started at 6. I was meeting some friends, and then who lived near the stadium. And then by the time I got on the subway, I was staying in Midtown. I came up, it was pouring raining. And then that was a metaphor of what was about to happen. So the game got rained out. I never made it there. And then that weekend is when Lehman and everything, and they could not call fast enough. Remember that letter of intent we signed?
Yeah.
Tear it up.
Yeah. That's scary for anybody.
That was scary, and I'll never forget the first meeting when you go from, with the bank, which I won't mention the name, when you go from the relationship managers to the workout people. And I remember we go to a room, and I'm sitting in a chair, and all of a sudden I'm looking up, and I'm like, I'm in a little chair, and I'm like, guys, I'm 6'7", 6'8", and I went and got another chair, and they tried intentionally, and it was just, so at the end of the day, and I had guaranteed some of the loan, which I will never do again.
We learned.
You learn. And then we ended up working out a settlement. We ended up, so that was my first deal in my company. I wiped out a good sense of a good chunk of my family's net worth in my first deal.
In one deal.
Yeah.
But I think we learn more from our down times than we do our positive times.
I would argue that if I hadn't gone through that, all that happened after I wouldn't have been able to accomplish.
But I think when I listen to your story, I think about all the investors you have today. They obviously, many of them stuck with you during that time, despite that, because of the way you approached business.
Well, and again, we didn't have, all the investors we had was our money and some outside investors and very high net worth, individuals. It was small change for them. $30 million was a lot for me. So, but then you learn, and one of the things I learned is that some of these complicated, affordable transactions, when you try to unwind them, and in the last panel they talk about 11 layers of capital stacks.
It's like a bundle of wires.
That's a bundle of, yes, there's a bundle of negotiations that one has to have. So I learned that, which helped me better on the investment side.
So let's fast forward the movie 16 years between the founding
Yes.
of Avanath to the present. $4 billion in AUM, 16,000 units, 15 or so states,
Yes.
and probably 50,000 plus residents across
Yes.
those communities. It's like being the mayor of a small city. And I know part of your ethos is to find and build better communities and how people live and how they're regarded. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, my first entry into the affordable business was actually through our debt business. We were one of the largest seller servicers of affordable loans, primarily tax-exempt bond deals for Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. And we did a lot of deals with AIG, big institutions. And then when I go look at the properties, I'm like, God, these aren't very nice. They weren't very well managed. They weren't, customer service. And I said, there's got to be a better paradigm for doing these things. And also it was all tax oriented, and no one had any long-term economics, upside. So we felt that the model, if we went after buying some of these, we reconfigured them, we bought them at the right economic value, then that took everything that you do, the best practices in the market rate business, and apply it to that, then you might have a different outcome. I didn't know that this would work, but that was my premise.
So you took a different approach to the management of affordable.
Yes.
And really, in many respects, demystified the stigma behind it.
Yes. You know, that's always the biggest issue, and I shared this with you when you're fundraising, and you know, it's people, you know, I've told it, and maybe some of you have heard this story. I go to a property, and one of our prospective investors who said, called me the day before, was going to Loudoun County, Virginia, and said, is there any chance I'm going to get shot at your property tomorrow?
God.
Now, Loudoun County is one of our most affluent markets. At the time, it was probably $150,000 median income. So the people that lived at our property at 60% of AMI, you know, they were making $80,000, $90,000.
But it was still workforce housing.
Yeah, but they worked in the tech sector, and he said, well, will that happen at 10 a.m. tomorrow? And I'm like, at 10 a.m., when you go to our property on a Tuesday, it's going to be empty. And I said, regarding getting shot, I don't know your personal situation. I don't know who you owe money to, ex-girlfriends, mistresses, but
You said that with a straight face.
no, I said, so I can't say that you're not going to get shot, but you're not going to get shot by any circumstances that occur at our property.
So he came.
Yeah, he came. He didn't invest.
He didn't invest, okay.
I may have offended him with my other answer.
But at least you're honest, and I think that's part of the demystification of affordable. And you've conquered that through a lot of foreign capital. I think in Europe, people have embraced your product.
Well, you know, it's fascinating. And we didn't, you know, our first two funds, our first one was about 130 million. Our second one was about 220 million. Third one, which we got to 400 million, it was so hard. And we were just getting everyone, we don't like this business. We're concerned about the headline risk. And we happened to come across a European investor. And one of the things we learned, it's part of their asset class to invest in affordable housing there. So our first European investor came in our third fund, which was a large Dutch family office. And then we started going over there, and everybody liked affordable housing there. You know, they call it social housing, and the prospect of doing that in the U.S. So that really, you know, it just you know, grew our capital base considerably because they got the business. And they'd come over here and they said, my God, this is so much nicer than our primary housing, what you do. But
Really?
that was really the growth in our business. And you know, people have a lot of concerns, and I know on the previous panel they talked about safety, security, and there's one thing that makes a property safer, and that is minimize turnover. Our annual turnover in our portfolio is about 15%.
Amazing.
The more, and my good friend Malcolm Johnson said it, when people know each other and know their neighbors, and if you can get good people living together, then they're going to tell you when they're bad actors there. And so, but that makes a huge difference.
So here you are, you're building better communities in 14 states. What are some of the nuances you think that you do that maybe others don't see on the same margin as you do?
Well, you know, you know, in many of the places that we invest, you know, there are other needs in that community as well. You know, there are needs for better grocery stores and healthy foods. So we try to bring things like farmers markets. You know, the big thing is when you have family communities, you know, we have a couple of big ones, like 600 units, and when the school bus pulls up at 3 o'clock, no one's home. And you may have 1,000 kids.
Yeah.
And what do you do with them? So we have done after-school programs, and these are things that we don't do. You know, it's pretty amazing. There are lots of after-school programs that are out there that, you know, their biggest need? A place to do it.
Yeah.
So
no
we
space.
have these communities and we have these clubhouses that are empty other than Super Bowl Sunday, so we bring them on site and they engage.
And you staff it. You staff it. With
No,
them.
no, a third party does. I mean, they just need a place.
Okay.
And they are funded, and they just come on site and do it. You know, we will provide some, you know, money for refreshments and things like that. But it translates to higher occupancy, lower turnover, lower maintenance costs, because you got 400 kids in one place doing activities. You know, we will have sports programs, dance, art, things like that, but again, provided by third parties who, you know, their biggest issue is finding a place to do these things.
And you've provided that. Let's talk about public policy in America and what's happening.
I think we had an election.
We did? Okay. It's all good, right?
Yeah.
Well, there was a great struggle, I think, between progressive ideas and business ideas in that election. But when you boil it down to Main Street, we have a major housing crisis in the country, both on the for sale in terms of affordability, but clearly on the rental side of affordability. And we saw rent control get defeated in California per se with the Prop 33. But that doesn't solve anything.
You know, the one thing I'm going to just, it's, you know, I spend a lot of time up on Capitol Hill assisting the National Multifamily Housing Council. I'm a former chair of lobbying. And I can tell you this, I could pick the most extreme senator or congressman from the left. I can pick the most extreme from the right. And when I walk in their office, it will start the same conversation. Now, most members, there are some wealthy ones, but most of them came up, they were on school board, then city council, then ran for Congress. I mean, they're middle class, upper middle class. The first thing they'll say, and it's regardless of party, I've got this 30-year-old who's living in my basement. The rents are too high. What can we do to make rent? You know, that's how they start. I mean, affordability has impacted all of them.
Sure.
And, you know, they may have an aging parent that needs better, more affordable senior housing. So it's surprisingly a big uniter. You think, well, people in the middle, but it's across the board. And what I see is that we have gotten to a tipping point where everybody realizes we need to build more housing. Now, there are different approaches as to how we get there, but you know, I think that you don't need to convince anybody that there's a housing need because they're all experiencing it themselves.
They are, but that positive conversation at the federal level, how do you translate that down to the local level where the great struggle is not in my backyard, not enough state funding, so forth and so on?
You know, when I talk to neighborhood groups and they were like pushing back, particularly about affordable housing, first thing I say, you know what? You know what our residents are going to look like? They're going to be your kids that have $100,000 of student debt that work at Starbucks. That's going to be our resident. You know, and people get that affordable housing is what we all, when we got our first apartments, what did you pay for rent your first apartment?
When I moved out here in 1980, my half was $300.
Okay.
And it was down at the beach area.
Okay, so my first apartment in Chicago, I paid $325 for a one bedroom.
We're the same age.
But you know, I think I am actually bullish on what's going to happen going forward. And I think I've mentioned this, I was in actually DC yesterday, and I mentioned this to, I had meetings at both Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac to housing people, and they forgot something that I think most people in America forgot. And that is in 2019, the Trump administration had created this alliance with the House Democrats and to do a affordable housing as part of an infrastructure bill. And they were talking about $7 to $10 billion. And the reason that I'm one of the few people that remembers it is because at Congress, at that point it was Chairwoman Maxine Waters chaired the committee. She asked me would I speak at a hearing. So, you know, it was a 4-hour hearing.
She asked you? She didn't tell you?
She asked me, but
okay.
You know, whatever. I said yes, ma'am. And
yes.
But you know, there was and the only issue that was dividing was people on the left said, well, we should funnel this through public housing associations, and then the people on the right, we should give it to Mr. Carter. I'm like, yeah. But there was a fair amount of agreement on that, and I'm sure everyone forgot about it because then we went into COVID and then it went away. But there was an initiative led by the administration and had also gotten, I think, Maria Cantwell in the Senate to back it. So, I think strange things can happen again.
Yeah, I mean, I think you've elected a president that comes from the real estate world. Certainly, he's going to be pro-development.
Yes.
I think I remember in New York, when you were chair of NMHC, you introduced him.
Yes, I did.
To a large group.
I interviewed him.
Before he was even candidate Trump, I think.
Yes, he was. And I remember I called him out on a few things. He said, Daryl, I am the only person that's ever had a #1 TV show that I chose to cancel it. I said, well, what about Seinfeld? He said, you're right, Daryl. Me and Jerry were the only two.
You got him. It's amazing. So going back to real estate for a sec, I think 2 years ago, maybe it's a little longer, you made a major investment in the center of the city. You bought I think it's 500 or 600 unit project.
Almost 700
Almost
units.
700 units in the
Baldwin Village.
Baldwin Village, older product.
Yes.
Tell us about that, because that's a major undertaking.
Well, it came up on the last panel, and relative to new affordable. When you talk about tax credit affordable, and Sierra who is an executive Bridge Housing, I'm on their board, and she talked about $800,000 a unit. I mean, we've had deals that are $1 million a unit that have come in. That's just not sustainable. And we've got to figure out ways to create long-term affordable housing without all of that public infrastructure.
Right.
And so what we did when we bid on these apartments, and of course we competed, probably you and every value-added apartment owner operator, and our approach, we went to the Housing Authority of the City of LA, who we have a great relationship with, and said, look, if we buy this and put affordability restrictions, and they're a statutory agency that can deliver a tax abatement, would you consider that? They said, absolutely.
So they forgoed their property taxes.
Yes.
In order to provide.
Right. So we put income restrictions that range from 60 to 80% on 75% of the property. And then for that, we get a tax abatement. So that tax abatement is worth about a 30% rent increase.
So that is referred to as a welfare exemption, I believe?
Yes, that is the
So
welfare.
there's different forms
Yes.
of affordable housing that are taking shape.
And the point is, we can't continue to build these properties where the spec on them is too much, and the cost, the friction cost in a tax credit deal, there's probably 35% of the costs are just in the structure of the deal.
In making it and getting it out of the ground with all the.
And if we could build things for, and that deal will be under $300,000 a unit, you can rent at 80% of AMI, and in that one, people's average rent was about $1,600, which is where they'll stay, and they'll go up and we'll put $50 million of renovations in.
So household income's in the 40 to 60 range?
Yeah, well, it's probably a little bit higher than that. They're
higher.
probably at 80%, 60 to 80% of area median income. But we have to use, and in that instance, it was, call it $220 million of acquisition price. We put $110 million of equity in it, but the present value of the tax abatement was about $40 million. So we were like a 3x private dollars versus public dollars. Typical tax credit deal, for every dollar of private money, there's $6 of public money. So we've got to come up with some strategies of doing cheaper housing, and you may have read, we've launched a venture where we're buying modular housing, and we have a venture with a company called Vessel Technologies. It's based on the East Coast, and we have 4 properties under construction today in Connecticut that we're buying for $200,000 a door.
And they're being manufactured for you there?
Yeah, well, no, it's a panelized system.
It's panelized.
Think of IKEA. You put
Okay.
something together at IKEA?
I do if I have time.
Yeah. Well, this is what this is like. It comes in
panelized.
sheets. It's panelized, and and they can be built in 6 months. And if you can be at $200,000 a door, you can rent it 80% of AMI, and you can make money. And
Amazing.
particularly if you can qualify for tax abatement. So we're hoping to do a lot of these. Actually, if you're under $300,000 a door, because it may cost more to do the same thing out here. But we have 4 going now. We're learning about how these work and everything. But we're very excited.
That's awesome. So you.
But we have to come up with technologies. I mean, some of the way we build, we haven't changed that in many years.
No, we have not. It's an arduous process. Let's shift a little bit to some personal thoughts.
Oh, no.
And get the audience to know a little bit about Daryl. Your parents, I think, were from Mississippi,
They were from Mississippi.
but they were very much encouraging of you of education.
And education and hard work were the 2 family values. And hard work, and I remember, and I know you're going to maybe touch on entrepreneurship and particularly the next generation, but I remember when I told my dad, so, you know, I spent 10 years working at Continental Bank and then Westinghouse Credit. And in 1991, when I was quitting and Quentin and I had decided to start Capri Capital, I remember telling my dad, hey, I quit my job today. He said, oh, that's great. Tell me about the new one. And I said, well, I'm going to start my business. And then I hear him screaming at my mother,
What?
He's finally doing drugs.
What?
He's finally doing drugs. He's out of his mind. I just remember that. And
You were in your
30s, early
30s by then,
30s,
okay.
yes. And my dad was like, oh God, he's, you know, it was one of those, if you ever remember Sanford and Son, Red
Sure.
Fox, that was like a little bit like my dad. He's, oh my God, he's going to hell.
Well, he didn't want you to fail.
Well, yeah, but you know, having a job was everything. And one of the things that, you know, entrepreneurship is something that, you know, somehow I had a desire to do. And, you know, and I like to see, I mean, what Martin, where's Martin? Is he in here? I mean, what he's done here,
Amazing.
What Malcolm is doing. I mean, these guys are killing it. I mean,
Well, how about all the things that you're doing to create a diversified company, create a community for Black Americans, and really, really do that in a way that is very, very, it shows a lot of leadership.
well, talent comes in a lot of, you know, directions. I mean, you know, and if you look at sports, which is probably the ultimate, I mean, if you look at all the great New England Patriot teams, Bill Belichick had this thing, the Patriot way, and not necessarily getting the best wide receiver, but getting the best athlete and getting someone who could come work in a team concept. And so, you know, in a way, when you're building an organization, you're building talent, and you're getting, and you know, talent comes in a variety of different forms. And, you know, so I think that's really important.
I'm actually hiring one of your proteges.
Yes,
which
you're
will be announced
hiring
soon.
one of my former colleagues.
Well, thank you. Talk about, you know, we all have mentors and we've all been mentees. What's some of the best advice you've received in your career, and who are some of your mentors?
I have so many, and it starts with my dad. And my dad, it was about hard work. And I remember every morning, my dad got this plaque for going 20 straight years without missing a day of work. And I remember,
Not even a sick day.
no. And I remember that when I ate my breakfast in the morning, I looked at that plaque every day. And it takes virtually, and I know we've gotten kind of crazy since COVID, but it takes something for me not to go to the office, because I think about my dad going into the welding shop at a Chrysler plant, and I'm like, he did it. I got to get my butt up and go. And that's an incredible value.
It really is.
You know, so.
Particularly today when we have birthday days off.
We have birthday,
the day before the holiday, the day
How many
after the
holidays
holiday.
do you guys have?
How many employees?
I mean, no, how many holidays? We've gone
At least
up.
15.
Oh, I counted. We've gone like from 10 to 14, something like that.
It's a different world order. Tell us about the funniest anecdotal mistake maybe you ever made. And
oh God, I thought of it, and there is one.
All right.
And first of all, my first basketball coach was. How many have seen the movie Beverly Hills Cop? 1, 2, 3. Well, my first basketball coach, who plays Eddie Murphy's boss in Detroit, Inspector Todd, he is not an actor.
Really?
No, he was the deputy police chief for the city of Detroit, but he was my police athletic league coach. And I learned my first exposure to the F word came from him. So what you see...
Functional.
Yes, functional. Okay. Everything you see with him, that is not acting. But that was as a 12, 13-year-old, that was my first basketball coach. And so my most embarrassing moment was when I played on this select team. Now, I have been playing, and your uniform, when I start, you got a T-shirt. Then maybe you progress a little bit, you get on a better team, you get shorts and a jersey. Well, this team I got selected, and we were playing in a tournament at St. Cecilia. And we got the way the NBA players have the pants and the warm-up, and got that. And I was just like in heaven. This is absolutely heaven. And I remember the first game, I didn't start, and the coach called, Sergeant Hill said, "Carter, get in." I ripped my things off, and I'm going to the scorer's desk. And he said, "Boy, your ass is out." And I said, and I had forgotten to put on my shorts. I was so enamored.
Oh my God.
and I'm like, oh my God. And I had to go back and put them on.
And you're always so well dressed when I see you.
And so he said, I came back to the bench. He said, and he came to me and he said, "You know what? If I can't trust you to put your pants on, I can't trust you to do anything. You're sitting here today."
Oh my God, great story. How about a round for Daryl?
So it's a basic thing. You can't do anything unless you put your clothes on and
put those pants on correctly.
Put the pants on correctly.
All right, since we're talking about words that begin with the letter F, let's talk about the future a little bit before we part. What are some of the goals for Abanath? What are some of your goals? And what would you like to achieve here in the remainder of your career?
Well, we believe that there is a great opportunity going forward, particularly in the markets we're in, to be able to double our business over the next 5 years. That's a strategic goal. That's, we're trying to amass the capital to do that, and opportunities, what I mentioned with this vessel program, that's part of it. And I think there's a political environment that is very accepting of what we do and wants to do more of it. So that's on the business side. On the personal side, I want to, I think it's important to have succession, and we are working on, people. I'm grooming people to eventually step in, because, I have all kinds of other hobbies. I love to play golf and things like that.
And you have an artistic side, too.
Yeah, a little bit of that. So at some point, leaders at some point need to move on, or else you lose the next generation of people.
They don't need to hang around forever.
You don't need to hang around forever, and I can be, and I can do other things. So.
Well, Daryl, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for listening to Building Better Communities today with Daryl Carter as our guest here at the Beehive.